Great. Well, look, we're at 2 minutes past, so why don't we get going? Firstly, thank you very much, everybody, for giving up your afternoons, mornings, evenings, whichever, to join us for this. We really appreciate your time, and hopefully, we'll have a really interesting conversation over the next 30 minutes or so. I'm with Martin Blackburn today. I'm Ray. Firstly, I'm the CPO here at Plandek, and I'm with Martin, who's the chair of several high growth businesses, private equity backed and others. And I'll let Martin say a word or two of intro for himself before we get
Yeah,
rolling.
great to meet you all, and thank you for inviting me here today. Yeah, so I help out with, well, who knows if I help out? I try my best to help out with about half a dozen high growth private equity firms in different verticals, all of which have been touched by AI over the last 3 years.
Brilliant, thanks. What we thought we'd do in terms of format was take about sort of 5 to 10 minutes, just a few introductory slides and comments and things. Take a little bit of time to have a conversation with Martin really about what he expects to see as a chair of boards, as a board member, on the topic of Gen AI, in particular how it's used in technology functions. And then we've got the Q&A function open on the chat, so please do enter your questions as we go along, and we'll do our best to touch on those if we haven't already done so. Let me begin by then sharing my screen, and we will get launched into it. Great. Hope you can all see that. So look, topic of today really is, I guess, a little slant on Gen AI. We're going to try a little bit different from some of the usual sort of, what's going on and the superlatives about how much it's taking over the world and technology functions in particular, and really focus very much on a topic that I know is of big interest to a lot of our clients, our prospective clients and future clients that we speak to, and also people I just speak to in general in the sort of technology and product world, which is how do you explain to what's going on really to the board level. And I think, at board level, people have definitely heard the hype, right? The fact that Gen AI is here, that AI in general is here, is coming through, is having a huge effect on business in general, is there. There is also a huge hope that's around there, right? And some arguably inflated expectations in some cases, and I'm sure we'll touch on that with Martin as we get into it, about what can be achieved from some of these tools and ways of working. But our jobs as sort of senior technology leaders very often is to try and give clarity on what's actually happening, cutting through the hype, setting realistic expectations, but also driving that agenda forward perpetually, especially in the sort of fairly early phase of what's going on. And I think for those of us who've been around a little while, it's to use that sort of famous Yogi Berra mangling of words. It's deja vu all over again. 30 odd years ago, it was all, what's our internet strategy going to be? What are we doing without the internet? What should we be doing? 10, 15 years ago, or 15 to 20 years ago, really, so what's our mobile strategy? What are we doing there? Now it's what's our AI strategy, and in particular, the Gen AI strategy that's on people's minds. But I think there's one really big difference at the moment, for me anyway. In those last few waves and waves before that, it was all about what does it mean for our business? What should we be doing? And that's a huge question right now and is a really important one. And I'm sure if people are interested, we'll touch on that in future sessions as well. But today's focus really is on the additional bit, which is there's always the push around what does this mean for our function as technology, right? What is it you as a technology leader are doing? And that's the additional question I think that gets asked quite a lot now about this particular technology, and why I think it's a particular interest to us as technologists on this topic. Now, before diving into some of the points on that, I just wanted to sort of touch on a little bit around communicating to the board. And I guess we'll dive into this quite a lot more with Martin in a few minutes. But really, for most of us who are sort of working on operational roles, executive roles, there's a little bit of difference in how you're trying to communicate to the board, both in terms of what you're communicating, much more on outcomes and oversight, and much less on the sort of mechanics of the operation, and a lot on risk management and risk mitigation, and also how you communicate it as well, and the sort of level of stuff that which you do it. And we'll touch on both of those aspects as we go through today's conversation. There's four big things I want to touch on very quickly, just to sort of set the scene, and then we'll get into the conversations and the questions. The first is around, really making sure whatever you do aligns back to the strategy of the business and the value that's being delivered. The second thing is the risks, really helping educate right now, this stage of a sort of maturity on what the risks are, and how to manage those. The third is to make heavy use of data and metrics in what you do. Be fact based. Great for cutting through when times are a lot of uncertainty is around. And then fourthly, a few tactical things on communication that I try and adopt over the years, and I'm sure Martin will either echo or refute in terms of things to touch on. Aligning to strategy and value. And I think obviously it's very hard to speak in generalities here, because it clearly matters to what is the focus in any particular business at any moment in time on what to touch on. And in particular, how does that vary by product and P&L line? And the way I've just tried to sort of frame this up a little bit is inevitably there are two things you're trying to optimize for. One is increasing revenue, and the other is controlling costs or growing margins. And I think in terms of how you're trying to position your conversation with the board around the use of the GenAI in the technology function, really what you want to emphasize more will probably vary quite a bit by product and by stage of business you're at. So if you're in a high growth private equity backed business, as an example, you're probably much more interested in, and the board is much more interested in, how are we getting to market faster with the things we're doing? How can we bring forward features? How can we speed up the software development process, possibly more than at this moment in time on cost reduction or indeed cost avoidance? But I think having those sort of lenses in mind and the way in which you communicate the things and the metrics you link it back to, I think is important, just to try and continually bring it back to the value and the outcome you're trying to achieve, and a little less on the mechanics of the tools and so on that are there. The second message really to get across is around on risk and how to educate around the risks. And I've really sort of tried to break these into two categories of risk: the strategic risks and the operational risks. And just to give some examples on that, and again, we'll touch on this in the conversation, strategically, I think some of those are in part things that affect the technology function, but in a much larger part, things that are affecting the business. Questions I get asked are very much around, of the new entrants that may emerge into our space, how are they coming about? Are they our existing competitors that are changing tack and adopting things? Are they, two folks in a garage putting something together in a very different way, using some of these tools at a pace we're not even able to comprehend it unless we're really involved in these things. Did say what are the changes around business model, around customer behavior and regulatory things, because you want to be just aware of and help educate a board around. Operationally, there are a lot of things to think through. And again, I won't, in the interest of time, go through all of these pieces here. But again, things we hear time and time again are around controls over data privacy and PII. If you're sending things off to third-party LLMs, what controls you are applying around that stuff, how are we protecting our own IP, and so on. And then in terms of the work that we produce, what checks and balances do we have around the code quality that's there, any vulnerabilities that we may be introducing, and some other pieces on there. So quite a few things in there to sort of touch on. And I think, again, our role as tech leaders is to educate our boards around these different categories of risks, and then the things that we are actively doing or seeking to do to mitigate some of those pieces. Data and metrics, three sort of categories really there of things that I think are worth thinking about, and I'll spend slightly longer on this section because clearly this is at the heart of what we as a Plandek do, which is really help you bring some of these things to life and communicate them in easy ways and relevant ways. The first set of stuff then around sort of operational level metrics, really, and the question I get asked a lot and our customers ask us a lot is, how are we doing in terms of adopting these tools of our base of engineers, product managers, etc.? Which tools are they using? What are our choices around how we're doing that? Do we see balances between different teams? What's our typically weekly active use rate seems to be the metric that most people are most interested in, but daily and monthly have got their value as well. And then understanding what those tools are being used for and the patterns of usage as well. Starting with those things, I think, is essential, and we can maybe touch on some of those things and expectations around that in a moment or two. The second set of stuff, where I think where particularly the board level is particularly important as you get into it a bit more, is the impact, right? Ultimately, it's around productivity, but really, going to break that down into its individual bits, I think it becomes very important. What are the teams working on? Where's the focus? For these sorts of tools, are we using them on strategic revenue, generating type things, or on term tier routine work, right? So bug fixing, maybe some of the refactoring type work that might go on. I think making sure that your expectations and actuality on those things are aligned and you're communicating that in the context of the business goals is hugely important. And then the other things around speed, quality, predictability, again, typical sort of underlying metrics that we measure ourselves, we encourage our customers to use our tool to measure, I think are also very important, really, in the context of how is GenAI addressing those things, or improving or indeed creating extra concerns around those things. Clearly, it's very hard to attribute so many things going on to attribute all that back to GenAI. But I think some notion of trying to see how it works and obviously using some business judgment and experience judgment to do that, I think is essential. And the final sets of stuff then at the strategic level, a little bit around sort of what it's doing from a sort of people perspective. Are we changing the skills mix? How are we encouraging people to use these things? What are we seeing over time, the impacts of that? And also what process changes are we putting in place? I think we've touched on this in some of these previous webinars, and I think the recordings, if people are interested, are available on just how we see changes to the overall SDLC, changes in terms of getting feedback loops faster, in terms of pushing things earlier up into the chain, and I guess just different working practices that come through. Again, a longer time horizon to measure on and to talk about, but very important. And the final slide I just want to sort of leave you with before getting to the discussion with Martin and then looking at some of the questions and so on that people may have is really around how you might go about communicating some of this to the board. So again, just 5 little sort of things to try and bring through, and I guess we'll touch on some of this in the conversation. Clear messaging, firstly, very important, and typically a style of conclusion first and then supporting points. So succinctness. Anyone here who's ever been through sort of a consulting world, pyramid principle type thinking and explanations, very helpful for getting some of those bits across and the style of it. I think a lot of data, a lot of evidence, particularly where there's uncertainty, becomes important. Good boards will always be asking you to back things up, with evidence where possible, and then testing the hypotheses and the conclusions of that. Lines, not dots, so giving trends and so on over time, and bringing out the anomalies. And very finally, where possible, I think for new things, using examples, using demos to bring some of that to life can be very helpful. Some vibe coding type exercises, even if you're really into that sort of stuff with board members, just to sort of show a little bit about how some of these tools can be used and where some of the limitations might be. What's easy to prototype, what's harder then about getting that into production. That was deliberately quite a sort of swift run through some slides and some scene setting things. What I'd quite like to do, Martin, really is to sort of ask you a couple of questions, if I may, on I guess your perspective really on some of as a board member, as a chairman of multiple companies, what is it you most want to understand around this topic, and how do you want that communicated to you?
Right. So it's a pretty broad question.
Yes.
Pretty broad question, Ray. So I think the first thing, the job of a board is to check that the company is executing the plan. And most boards are pretty good at doing that. Outside of our industry, the industry we operate in, either tech or tech-enabled companies. And the KPIs they use for that are very familiar to them. So they'll use metaphors for companies' progress of how much they've sold, how much revenue they're generating, how much profit they're making, and then they can drill down on that. So if you're an FMCG company, they can look at how many bottles of Coca-Cola they've sold or how much cheese they've sold, and they can look at the manufacturing costs of those things, and they can validate very quickly whether not only are they executing on their plan in terms of their KPIs, but they can also check the quality of their execution. I mean, are they wasting money or not? And are they achieving their goals? The frustration of a board of a tech company is most people aren't specialized enough to ask the right questions. So what boards of companies do in tech who aren't specialized, and there are a lot of those, is they try to put a template on the business which is very familiar to them, which is how much have you sold, how much revenue are you making, how much profit are we making, and then try to ask some questions about tech. And I shouldn't say it amuses me. It doesn't amuse me. It frustrates me. We'll spend in a board meeting, and I've been doing this now for about 10 years. Most of the board meeting talking about everything else, and there'll be one chart on the biggest cost item in our cost base, which is usually some kind of tech enablement, some kind of tech project, some type of tech experiment. And at the moment, there are literally hundreds of standard ways of showing that stuff to boards of companies, none of which is very well understood by non-specialized boards. And there's a real need, an industrial need, as we become more focused, particularly with AI, in every company that exists, around how we discuss technology, how we monitor progress, how we figure out if we're doing a good job. And that should become a much bigger part of the board discussion. And the sort of symptoms you get because this happens is that it's very hard to get investment decisions. Things go slowly. Change doesn't happen quickly enough. When things go wrong, there's tons of inspection and not much help. And the job of a board, other than making sure that we're executing the plan, is to help the team. And particularly in the private equity, high growth world, we spend a lot of our time trying to help the team. And without understanding epics and story points and all these things we've invented to show progress on technical projects, it's very difficult for the boards to help tech-enabled companies. So, what I really want to know are some of the things that Ray's been talking about, and having a standard way or a metaphor of delivering that, which is easy for everyone to understand, where there's no startup time, is really important. And the things I want to understand is how much time are we spending on innovation and how much time are we spending on fixing stuff simply. That's a real metaphor for, is the company going forward or not in terms of tech. I think speed, we just need to know how productive we are and understand if we're meeting the estimates that we set ourselves. So, understanding the predictability and reliability of the estimates and the speed at which we're producing our software so that we can benchmark ourselves against other teams inside the same organization and also other teams outside of our industry to figure out how we get better. I think quality, understanding in all sorts of ways the quality of the products we're producing, because I sat through a different wave which didn't talk about, which was the mass outsourcing of software development, where in the early days we were producing software very cheaply but of very poor quality. And understanding, with these new productivity tools, is the quality good? Do our customers like the sort of stuff we're producing? That's very, very important. And then an overlay on all of this is AI. So once you've baselined, are we focused on the right things in terms of innovation and fixing? Are we going fast enough in the current world? Is the quality of our software good enough? And are we predictable enough with our estimating? Then adoption of AI and the effect of the adoption of AI on all those things is the thing that boards are most interested in. And if we could have a standard way of doing that, I think it would move the debate forward light years, speed up investment decisions, and allow boards to help tech teams get on with the work they're doing.
And then I guess that's what you want. I'm curious to know, sort of, across the multiple companies you see, what do you see in terms of measurement against those things, particularly, I guess, on some of the AI focused things? Are you seeing that now? Other things you would like to be able to see?
So, I mean, we started a long time ago in some of my companies with AI, so 3-4 years ago, and we it was just 1970s football to start with. We were kicking the ball down the field, everyone chasing it, and see where we got to. But fortunately, in some of those companies, we had implemented Plandek, so we did have productivity metrics. We understood where we were, so that we could see. We couldn't see whether we were meeting our goals really. We couldn't see whether we were creating value really, but we could see that our velocity was increasing and we were developing more software in the same period of time with the same sort of team size. And that was a good start. Now what I'd like to see is with the AI tools, are we actually developing value faster? Well, because we can see at the moment is that we are developing software faster. We don't know if we're developing value faster.
Right. There's another sort of related thing then on that. You spoke about sort of previous waves of change you've been through, and I guess the ability to create value from those things, right? The sort of the previous waves of technology and so on we've all seen. I'm curious for your perspective then on sort of the scale of this change now and expected versus some of those previous waves.
Well, I mean, again, I remember messing about with AI at university, and I'm an old person, and quite honestly, didn't work because we didn't have the computing power, we didn't have fast networks, and programming in Lisp was quite tricky. So now we've got these three forces coming together. Fast networks, almost unlimited compute power, huge amounts of storage, and tools which allow you to develop things really quickly. I think now it works. That it's a profound change to the way every business works, and it will be. And it's not exactly what you think. So I can see it outside in some of the businesses I help out with, and inside out. So outside in, I've got one firm, which is a huge BPO in a regulated industry, and they're now doing double the amount of transactions with half the number of staff. And that is only with a few AI use cases. And what we're finding as we become more and more agentic, the operating model of the companies is changing. So we used to have, in the past, we'd have, as humans, we love integrated functions. So we build out a function to do something, and then they interconnect with each other. And then you have another function that does something. So you have a manufacturing bit, and then you have a quality bit, and then you have, in our new world, those operating models don't really exist. In an agentic world, the way the company operates is different because these agents are talking to each other continuously. You've got continuous audit, you've got continuous improvement, and the role of the humans in this world is fundamentally changing.
It's changing, isn't it? It's going to be
fundamentally changing. Sort of it's a completely different thing. So, and the best companies will make those people into superhumans as they adopt this AI stuff, and I can see that happening. The worst companies will try and push it off, and they won't create superhumans. They may create productivity improvements, but they won't create the superhuman environment, which creates a flywheel and makes the technology run faster. So that's an outside-in view. Inside out, if you look at the productivity improvements in companies around everything. I mean, we'll start with software development. I mean, there's a company I'm dealing with at the moment that took 30 years of a big team to develop their software platform. They're redeveloping that software platform using a number of tools. I mean, very stable requirement because they know exactly what it's got to do in 2 man-years. They're halfway through that development and they're on track.
Right.
And, we thought they were crazy guys at the start. But, that's the profound impact. The productivity improvements aren't twice as good, 3 times as good. In some areas, the life cycle compresses so much, it's hundreds of times better.
Interesting.
But in other parts, it still stays constant.
Interesting. You've sort of, Freddie's put a question in the chat actually. Thanks, Freddie, which I think you may have touched on a little bit on that, but I'll just read it out anyway, just so it's is there anything else to add. Freddie's question was, you made the point about using AI to see, are we developing value faster? emphasis on value. Great to have some examples or success stories on this. Clearly, the 30 to 2 man years one feels like one of those. Are there any others that you?
Yeah, I mean,
bring to
I'll
mind?
give you some human ones. So there's a business I work in where they have people wandering around producing reports in very important engineering jobs. So they go and check the girders are going to stay up and power stations aren't going to fall down. And they spend their Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Thursdays doing that. And then Fridays, they'd have an awful day where they would have to go home and write up all their reports based on their notes they've taken in their voice recorder. Now, that's all done instantaneously. They walk around with their voice recorder, it records what's going on. At the end, it produces a report, and it even checks the report against all the standards to make sure it works. Those people are delighted because they've got another day to go and spend with clients, and they haven't got to do the heavy lift of the work. And that's real value for everybody, not just it's value for the company, it's value for the employee, but the most value, believe it or not, is for the client, because the client wants the report back so they can take action on it. That report used to take a month probably to go through the cycle. It's now back to them within a few days.
I'll give one other very quick build on that, if I may, as well. In the sort of a software engineering sense, one of the things we were able to do, I think, through these sort of back to Pradip's point on sort of delivering value faster, was try and go much faster from a idea prototype type thing into reality, into live, by a massive factor. So we were holding hackathons start of the year, developing new features, coming up with new ideas, new prototypes, and then within a couple of months, getting those into production as beta versions of those new features on that sort of time frame, which I know would have taken us a few more months, certainly, if not half a year on some of them to do, because we were just able to get through those, I guess, review cycles much faster on the pieces. We've only got a couple of minutes left. I thought one other topic, just maybe to very quickly touch on, maybe just this question, and then if anything else comes through on the chat on this. But this is another one, sort of some of the chat things related to was around the risks section. We spoke a little about risks earlier, and of the sort of long list of things there, are there any in particular that you sort of think need to be communicated with particular importance through to the board right now, whether it's strategic things or operational things?
I think boards are pretty good at managing risk. Pretty good at managing risk. However, so if you look at the old world before the AI overlay, pretty good at all that stuff. So security, reliability, all that stuff. I don't think any boards are educated around what risks to ask about for AI.
Okay.
I think that's the problem.
So just helping know what questions to ask.
I don't think. I mean,
here is the education.
They don't understand that there's a thing called prompts. They don't understand. There's multiple tools. They don't understand how to deploy it. The cost structure is completely different. You're paying for agents rather than they just don't know. So
yeah,
I think the risk is boards don't know the right questions to ask at the moment.
Very good. And then one just very final thing, obviously, as you touched on already, sort of Plandek being deployed in certain places, giving you the sort of additional information on some of those things. I guess I'm curious to see, is there any sort of anything in particular that you find that helpful with through some of the metrics that you get from customers, or the way in which you see information presented back to you over and above your previous comments?
Yeah, I think. I mean, there's one large cluster which I help out with, where there's pretty universal deployment of Plandek, and it's night and day compared to the other boards I work with. So there's no startup time. The whole board understand what they're going to ask. They all understand what they're going to see. I mean, even though there's some variation, it's not a lot. The axioms of the reporting is very intuitive. So people can ask about focus, they can ask about speed, they can ask about quality, they can ask about reliability, and they're very logical things to ask about that. I guarantee that till that report appeared and we started talking about it as a board, no one would have asked those questions. And there's been some great outcomes from those. So when people ask about why can't you ever hit your deadlines, you go down a reliability axis and you go, well, look, the reason is because we're hitting a particularly difficult part of the build. This is what's going on, or we've had a big holiday, or we've lost some people, and it just gives you a great framework to talk about the biggest part of our cost line and it allows us to help, and it allows us to make investment decisions faster.
Very good. We are at time. There are a couple more questions in the chat that are open. Martin, I'm okay to stay on for another couple of minutes, and
yeah, sure.
To those, if you want to, if people want to stay, please do. This is all being recorded, so everyone will get a link to this, or if not, please email me or email Plandek, and we'll make sure you get the link. But for those who need to drop off, thank you so much for your time thus far. I hope it's been a useful conversation, and very happy to follow up with anybody on any of this stuff. But we'll just spend maybe 2 or 3 minutes just answering the last couple of questions, because I appreciate people taking the time to put them in. I'll start with one from Melanie, and it's a bit of a long question, so I won't read it all, but it's broadly around, so there's an excellent question on sort of balancing, exploring some of these tools, and teams possibly at very different levels of maturity in terms of adopting things and driving forward with them, and how really can we sort of help to get started on these pieces. There's a few points in here around, I think Melanie's very kindly given me a summary to help me out as well. Thanks so much. How do we try and create momentum really with engineering teams and functions around getting going?
So where I've seen success, it's not what you think. Because as technologists, we go straight for the tech in our teams. Where I've seen the most success is where the management teams have been through an adoption curve. So they're all using Perplexity, they're all using Gemini, they've all had a go at Cursor. I mean, this is the exec teams of companies where they've had a little go, and it doesn't matter. It's not like, they have to spend thousands of hours on it. They've got to have a little go. And if you can get the management teams of the companies adopting AI in a small way, it makes it so much easier for the rest of the organization, because they start to see the art of the possible. They start to stretch out the team. They start to understand why the investment is a good thing to do. They understand why it's not a loss of time. And also, the other characteristic of companies that I've seen adopt fast is where they're willing to take the time to do experiments. So they pick out a couple of use cases, they run after it. And also having an internal team that does that work too is super important. Where I've seen these projects not go so well is, where the management team has got no AI adoption, where it's somebody else's problem outside the company to do some AI work for them. You really are trying to create some superhumans inside your company that have got the domain expertise and understand the AI tools to be champions to drive the adoption faster. And when you get that flywheel working, it runs super fast.
Yeah, I'll just add maybe just one final little point to that. I think it's a fantastic question and a real challenge at multiple levels. How do you get people to use these things? I definitely think getting people to try and use them for taking the executives through things. I know with Martin, we did a little thing of me in 5 minutes with Cursor building a little website for sort of a property thing to try and illustrate what can be done quickly. Then B, it only gets you so far before making it live. There's still a few barriers to production, but I think that sort of notion of at that level doing things, we've done a lot with hackathons just to get teams at the working level use these things and see the possibilities and break the fear of it. And then it takes repeated work afterwards, I think, to still get some of the. You'll always find, like any adoption curve, some people massively using this stuff, others less so. How do you help them through clearly understanding who those individuals are? So some sort of measurement to get things on that, and then training, hackathon, leading by example, lots of things there. It's a topic I'm personally quite passionate about, as hopefully you can tell, having been a sort of a coder many years ago and then trying to rediscover the love of it again using some of these tools. So very happy to engage the conversations after with folks on that. Look, I know we're definitely over time by a bit, and I know there's one or two other questions which I'll probably try and answer offline if that's okay with people. But Martin, just want to thank you so much for your time on this. I hope people found the conversation useful, and very happy to engage on this topic with folks as people like. We're doing many more of these sort of topics and webinars on this subject going forward. So please, if you have suggestions on things you'd like us to cover with all sorts of audiences, let me know. And thank you again for your time. Have a great rest of your day.
Great to meet you. Thank you, Ray.